We are now live and we are now recording.
Dennis, can you hear us? Great. Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, March 23rd. We're at the Darien Public Schools Administrative Offices, and we're at the Board of Education Finance Committee. Our next meeting, as you said, April 28th. April 20th. April 20th. So we'll get right to the agenda. Rich, review February 2023 financial reports.
So the financial report through February does show a positive balance of $727,189. So the change is $24,809 from the previous month. Just to highlight some of the changes, we are releasing $17,000 in student interns at the middle school as they were unable to secure an intern for the second half of the year. However, that might have to be used for substitutes as we flagged with the earlier fall student intern. The Board of Ed approved pre-purchases totaling $249,188 are built into here, and those are the transfers that you'll see later on. The annual audit came in under budget by $1,300. The adult education cooperative that we have with Stanford came in $2,500, and that's just a product of less individuals in the program. The biggest change is in relation to excess cost. We are forecasting an additional $253,186 in additional revenue. This is based on the March 1st filing that included 2 additional students that we were not able to claim for in December. So in total, $727,189 with the general education RC is a positive $165,737, and then the special education RC is a positive $561,452, with essentially all of that coming from excess cost. Just to highlight again some of those changes through the various RCs and RC3. Again, the student interns are forecasting a total positive balance of $32,000, which is the balance of the fall and spring interns. If we move to RC 11, which is the next item, Interscholastic shows a deficit of $40,988. And again, those are the pre-purchases for the uniforms that the board approved during the budget process. In RC 12, maintenance equipment shows a negative balance of $14,050. And again, those are the pre-purchases that the board approved during the budget process. In RC 13 music, equipment does show a negative balance of $6,430. And again, those are the pre-purchases that the board approved during the budget process. RC 14 art does show a negative balance of $6,600 in equipment. And again, those are the pre-purchases of the pottery reels that were approved. In RC 15 technology, equipment does show a negative balance of $39,600. And again, that is the pre-purchases that were approved during the budget process. And in RC 17 health, health supplies does show a negative balance of $2,000. And again, that is the pre-purchase of the AED at Oxford that was approved during the budget process. In RC 19 curriculum, there's a negative balance in textbooks of $133,492. And again, those were the pre-purchases that were approved during the budget process. In RC 22 Tech Ed, there's a negative balance of $3,960 in equipment, which again is the pre-purchases that were approved in the budget. And then again, $2,068 in Tech Ed under new equipment, and that is also the pre-purchases that were approved during the budget process. Just in RC 24, we have received 3/4 of the December 1st filing of excess costs. So we are in receipt of just over $1.8 million. That was received at the end of February, and that was based on the December filing of $3.45 million. We have submitted as of March 1st, $3.8 million, which I mentioned earlier was due to 2 additional students that we were allowed to claim that we weren't allowed to claim in December. So at a 70% reimbursement, that would assume a $2.67 million reimbursement. The final reimbursement from the state isn't set to be received until the end of May. Moving on to, well, actually, really, that's really it for the RCs in terms of the changes.
Okay, let's stop there. Sure. For any questions?
Just curious about excess cost. Will that number remain the same in May, or do you think there'll be any more change to that?
The only thing that could happen is if the state legislature does change the reimbursement rate. So there was a discussion about changing the tiering of reimbursement. So if you remember at the beginning of the year, they changed the way they reimburse to tier it based on town wealth. And so that's where we're at the 70. They did talk about moving that up. So if they do move that up, it could change. But our March filing is done, so there is no other opportunities to file between now and then.
Thanks.
We have flagged that at the last meeting, and there's been no communication since.
So just as uncertain on the outcome there. Just ECR, I mean, that was a incremental development over the last 4 or 5 weeks, right?
Yeah, so we had the expenses already flagged because we knew the students were here and we were already paying those expenses in the December filing. The state would not allow us to claim those individual students in the December 1st filing. Part of it has to do with maybe the location that they were at, the individual contracts that you have to have in place. Fast forward to the March 1st filing, those claims were actually approved. So then we can include that in the March submission.
Okay. Well, and then so when we approved the pre-purchases, we were looking at a $500,000 surplus, give or take, with anticipation of dropping down to 250-ish, maybe. Okay. So now we find ourselves back with a larger surplus. I guess one of the question is, and again, this would have to come under board consideration, but when you think of pre-purchases, did you hold back on anything? You gave us a long list, not to kind of bend the budget curve or anything, but, Board of Finance still has the budget in its hands.
Correct.
I'm just wondering if there's anything else that could be added to pre-purchases that would achieve the same goals that we did in the first grouping.
So the bulk, obviously, of the surplus is excess cost. So when we did recommend the pre-purchases, we kind of tried to put that aside and really look at the other areas. If the board wanted to touch excess cost, the only really things that you could look at in terms of pre-purchases is technology equipment, and then you would have that issue with kind of bending the curve in the future.
Okay.
A lot of like the smaller stuff in terms of like textbooks and maintenance equipment, we already really picked up. So there aren't a lot of kind of like big ticket items. And again, you would have to be willing to probably touch excess cost.
Okay. I guess if you could just be in tune to the potential that we'll discuss at the board level, but maybe it doesn't make any sense. I mean, again, we're just moving costs, but there's nothing, I guess, caught in supply chain or anything like that either that you.
No, I mean, in terms of the supply chain issue, I mean, there's always the vehicles for Suburbans, but that's really a capital purchase.
Yeah.
It's far better than it was a year ago in terms of getting a vehicle, but there's still, a little bit of delay. In terms of operating things, computers are much better in terms of getting them than they were in the past. It wasn't like a year or two ago when everybody was buying every Chromebook they could because of remote learning. So that's kind of improved.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with handing back the surplus.
Yep, it just goes back to the town coffers.
Okay. Any other questions? Could you just run through, before we get to the transfers, the grant report and the food service and equipment? Because you did flag some equipment purchases.
Yep. So in the grant report, everything is relatively the same. We did receive a new grant from the state of Connecticut. It is towards the bottom of page 8 in the memo. It is the Connecticut SEDS implementation stipend for $20,000. This is to support the implementation and training of CT SEDS. So that does have to go towards payment towards staff, towards salaries, again, for the implementation of the new CT SEDS program. Moving on to the food service fund, we do have a profit currently of $55,806 with a fund balance of just over $488,000. We are forecasting a positive surplus at the end of the year of just over $220,000. I will say March is typically our best month because there are no school vacations and you have the most service days. So we would expect that profit to grow in March. So the fund balance would go to $652,000. If you do recall, a few finance committee meetings a while ago, we did say we would bring forward a recommendation for some equipment that probably needed to be replaced to kind of draw down on that fund balance. So we do have a recommendation of just over $94,000 in equipment. Some of the equipment in terms of the high school is a convection oven. It's actually original to the school when it was built in 2005. So it certainly is time to replace that. That's a little over $10,000. A char broiler for just over $18,000. That would allow us to be a little bit more efficient in terms of actually pushing food out to the students and the staff. A pizza bake oven. They've been doing a lot more pizzas lately, and there seems to be a lot more interest in pizza. And the pizza Impinger is, again, original to the school when it was built. It's very difficult to get fixed, and it is a popular item for the students. And then open display merchandisers at the elementary schools. This is really where not necessarily the main meal, but whether it's like fruits or salads or snacks, they're kind of displayed a little bit easier. It's easier to get the kids in and out of the line so that they have more time to eat and enjoy lunch as opposed to having to wait into the line. So just over $94,000. So that would bring the fund balance, projected fund balance down to $558,000, which is still very strong.
Yeah.
If you look at the revenue, the revenue is about 2.6 million for the year. So you'd probably want a fund balance of around 10 to 12.5% of revenue. So at 10%, you really only need about $260,000. So this would bring it down a little bit. And then as The year progresses in future years, then we can bring back some more equipment needs probably at the middle school.
And then aren't we also funding some monitors from that budget?
So for next school year, we're proposing to fund the lunch monitors out of the lunch account. So that'll draw down a little bit, but given that we're making about $200,000 a year, and that won't really necessarily affect the fund balance. You might just have a little bit less of a profit right here.
I mean, this is an incredibly good problem to have, but I mean, what happens if we continue to grow fund balance and we can't find things to spend on?
Sure. So the best example is Westport. So Westport, they tend to have, $300,000 to $400,000 in profits every year. And so what they do is ultimately, as the program grows and there's not enough equipment to kind of replace, they actually offset their operating budget with it. And so for Westport, they, for example, use it to fund a portion of custodial services because they clean the kitchens, they clean the cafeterias. And so what you end up having is like a credit against your operating budget. So you're still using it. Just the accounting mechanism is to lower your operating budget and then also lower your food service account. So it's somewhat similar to what we're doing with the lunch monitors,
Right.
but we're just not quite there yet.
So along those lines, we're going to be talking about kind of 5-year forecast budgeting as part of this agenda item. Maybe that's something we can kind of bake in. Maybe we didn't do anything for next year other than the monitors, but
Correct. So the lunch monitors are really kind of like the first step to it.
Yeah.
It's almost like a baby step if you think about it. But if we were to get to where Westport is, Westport's able to, again, as I mentioned, kind of offset some operational costs. And again, it just has to be something that you can kind of correlate to the cafeteria,
Yes.
to food service. So lunch monitors are a perfect example because they're in the cafeteria. Custodians are a good example because they're cleaning the cafeteria, things like that. Always work.
wow, okay. Katie.
I just wanted to add that we had also talked about down the line after the Oxbridge kitchen and cafeteria come online and kind of piloting the return back to sustainability with dishwashers, that was another piece, kind of an equipment that we had talked about, the surplus maybe going to the other schools and
So-
adopting that same.
So once Oxbridge's kitchen and cafeteria are actually open, we have probably like a year behind us. You'll also have a year past in the HHR buildings. And so then that could be an opportunity maybe to expand that, maybe first to Tokenique as the other schools kind of get finished renovating. And then if it is successful, moving into Hinton Homes. And
Awesome. Anybody else? Dennis?
Sorry, Dennis, do you have something?
Yeah, so my question is kind of similar to yours, John, and I don't know if it's worth to ask for work to be done of what are the purchases that we're looking to do in the next 5 to 10 years, and then looking at the equipment we may need to purchase in the cafeterias, and then when, and assuming 200 or 250,000 a year, when do we expect to then see enough surplus to then pay down custodial?
Sounds like 2 years, but I agree.
Just kind of, if it's not a lot of work, I mean, just kind of lay that out for us so we can kind of have a
Dennis,
little.
might I suggest that kind of goes into, when we discuss 5-year planning, that would be a component of that.
Okay, perfect.
Practice, yeah.
My question was just because the projected fund balance is still rather high. Is there other equipment that we could be purchasing now or?
so I think we're looking at the middle school, and one of the things, so we actually still have an investment from Chartwells where they're willing to commit $100,000 to help improve some of our kitchens and cafeterias. And so one of the things we're looking at is the middle school. So if you recall at the beginning of this year, they did some like facility work at the high school in terms of the serving line. There's a room in the middle school, if you're familiar with the cafeteria, it's kind of a little bit like closed off. There's not a really great flow there. They'd like to open up some of that space and make like a deli and salad kind of area. And so that's probably something long-term that we'll look at, and whether or not it's just covered by that $100,000 of investment that we still have with them, or whether or not it'll be kind of like a partnership. So.
Okay.
And then just back to the grant, we have the ARP ESSER grant. I think we delayed the funding of the wellness center for that, but there's still 88,500 left in.
So there's 88,000, depending on what happens with the wellness center coordinator. If that ends up going forward, you draw about 65, depending on the timing of that individual, if it gets approved. So you'd still have a little over 20,000 left. And then sometime next year, we'll discuss about how to use that. There are some limitations of what you can use. It'll probably be technology would be the best consideration for it, given that it'd only be 20,000 left if the wellness center gets approved. If it doesn't get approved, then that 88 obviously brings a little bit more.
And what's the deadline on spending of that?
June 30th, 24. So we have
Okay.
one more school year.
Okay, so Alan, we had the wellness, the mental health directors begin
Yeah,
recently.
yes, she's, Dr. Dada is already on board and knows those considerations that the board would like feedback on those particular matters.
Right, and what's the timeline on her coming back to the board, you think?
Well, she is scheduled for an later April presentation, so it's around then that I really want to make sure she gets to understand the program, the people, the scenarios that she's been asked to look at, but she's going to be coming back to the board for a formal presentation, so I expect that will be made then. We had that discussion that tentatively we would do it at that April meeting.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to, I'm sorry.
Rich, I just wanted to ask about the Title I 2-year grant allocating for professional development and a literacy interventionist. When we were in the budget discussions, we learned that the Teachers College partnership was paid from a grant. Is that this?
That's the title
year?
grant,
Okay. And that's about $100,000 annually, is that
Yes.
right? So what happens, where does that cost land when the grant expires?
So the title grants are reoccurring grants. You could get grant compression, which districts have seen over the last, few years, not so much the last couple of years. But the title grants don't go away unless the federal government decides to end it, which is highly unlikely. If they were to end the grant, then the district would either have to absorb that or stop doing it.
Okay, but so we don't have expectations for
No,
that
I mean, at most, we've
like-
seen the grant kind of go down a little bit over time. Not over the last couple of years, but we don't expect the grant to go away.
Thank you.
Can we move on to the transfers then?
So there are 9 transfers for consideration. They all relate to the pre-purchases that were a part of the budget process. So the first is for $40,988, and that was the pre-buy of the uniforms. We are recommending taking the funds from salary savings related to the delayed start of the SSOs. The second transfer is for $14,050, which is the pre-purchase of the maintenance equipment. We are recommending taking it from the salary savings associated with the new salary schedule for the groundskeepers. The third transfer is for $6,430, and this was for the pre-purchase music equipment. We are recommending taking it from salary savings associated with the delayed start of the assistant director and facilities. The fourth transfer is for $6,600 in art equipment. And then we are recommending taking the funds from the new salary schedule for the groundskeepers and maintenance employees. The fifth transfer is for $39,600, which was the pre-purchase of Chromebooks as part of the budget process. We are recommending taking the funds from the new salary schedule and maintenance, the maternity leave and the assistant principal, and then the delayed start for the assistant director of facilities. The next transfer is for $2,000, which was the pre-purchase of the AED. We're recommending taking that from the delayed start of the technician and technology. The next transfer is for $133,492, which is the pre-purchase of textbooks. We are recommending taking the funds from the delayed start in the director of mental health, the delayed start in the middle school assistant principal, the China exchange program, which is not occurring, savings from the new salary schedule related to custodians, and then savings from the elementary intramurals. The next transfer is for $3,960, which was the pre-purchase of the Delta Saw. We are recommending taking those funds from the delayed start of the technician, the delayed start of the director of nursing, the delayed start of the SSOs, the delayed start of the assistant director, and then some salary savings and teacher aides. And then finally, $2,068 for the pre-purchase of a welding machine. And then we are recommending taking those funds from the elementary intramural savings.
And many of these were discussed at the board level. There's a thematic source of the funds that these were very certain budget line items.
So we did try to take everything from things that were associated with delayed start. So while the person's here, they weren't here for the full year, so they didn't actually earn that full salary. And so that money's essentially unencumbered and just available.
Perfect. Any questions on the transfers? So we talked at length about this, so I would recommend that we take a full recommendation to the board to approve the transfers that the, pre-purchases of, to fund the pre-purchases, basically. Just one little nitpick at the bottom of your schedule, the total line says pre-buy. Can you just change it to pre-purchase so we keep the same, same number, same language? Okay, so I think that's good. So the next item is discussion and reflection on the fiscal year 24 Board of Education budget process. I see Jill is here as well, so I want you to become a active participant, maybe get on camera, in this discussion. But, reflecting on our budget process, I think it was one of the best I've experienced over the last 4 years. But, we did find some items as a board, and we discussed that at our last board meeting in terms of where we could become more efficient, where we could, follow the proper role of each individual board and or, subcommittee. And just, in my mind, find ways of continuous improvement. The feedback we got from our fellow government officials was essential. So there's not an effort to change the feedback or getting feedback from our partners, if you will, but how we get it and when we get it, I think is a big focus of this. Some of the other feedback we heard was, the community would like to see a better 5-year budget projection in some cases, and I think of, when we create a new program, we as Board of Education members know that they start smaller, and then as they grow and as they mature, there might be additional FTEs, but that's maybe not as clear to the community and how that impacts the budget process as that program is approved. So I think that can be also part of the discussion. In our packets, Jill took notes from the Board of Education meeting, our last Board of Education meeting, and created an outline. I think it was a great outline in terms of, how we want to attack this process of modifying the budget process. So I'll leave it at there. I don't know if you have anything to add, Dr. Hadley.
No, I just, the reflection is helpful for everybody. I'll just say that it'll be critical that we complete this process. I won't say sooner rather than later, but in a reasonable time frame, because as soon as you change that calendar, everything kicks in. Like the 5-year, just so we know, like we did do that at one point, right? And then the board decided to transition away from it. But if you're bringing it back, that's okay. But that implies that all of these things have been identified up front, or most of them, right? Which brings everything sooner. So we just need to make sure that the other governing bodies get on board, or engaged in that calendar, whatever that means, the public calendar, and also whatever our calendar is behind the scenes, because it's going to change timeframes for the start of the budget discussions.
Yeah, and this comes from acting in the best interest of our board first, and not creating more work. I mean, for the administration. I think one of the main goals, as I think of it, was the question process and taking the weight off of the administration shoulders and placing it on our board shoulders. Again, soliciting feedback, but being the elected body, the only elected body that has the ability to take an appropriation and then basically set it within the budget line items. That's our responsibility to sift through those questions and prioritize things, and then, as I think, filter or organize better to the superintendent based on the public feedback we're hearing, so that your staff is not faced with it. I didn't count all the questions, but it had to be almost 150.
240.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say over 200, but I didn't want to overshoot.
Wow.
So the over under. Okay, so 240 questions, many of them which were redundant and or not. There were more policy questions than budgetary questions. So I think that puts an asterisk on why we're doing this. And again, we're not trying to stifle feedback. We're trying to better organize it and fit it in the framework of the roles and responsibilities that each government body has. And so, I think as I reflect, and again, the feedback was great, but it came a little too early in the process. And then we kind of passed off the responsibility of sifting through the questions right to the staff and superintendent. And it created a lot of extra work. So, we're definitely going to solicit feedback from our partners there. So maybe if we can, my goal is to quickly go through this memo and just talk about some of the highlights of things that we want to reflect on. I almost think of like an org chart, and I agree with you. we gotta kind of complete this within a month or so. Maybe not this board meeting clearly, but
I
have
would
some-
I would also say, Mr. Chairman, it just feels a bit, another contextual thing, it feels like there's a lot of redundancy that could be for everybody.
yes,
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. Again, there's a timeline and a process that has been well anticipated by state statute and our own town ordinance and charter in terms of the roles and responsibilities of each government body. So I think if we kind of stick to that, it's a great framework, and many people over decades of work have thought about this process. So I would want to stick to that as well. So this I'm excited for it. So Jill, you have anything to add, because you're a big part of creating this memo?
No, not fundamentally. What I'll do during this process, I'll sit here ex officio more than anything, but what I'll do is take notes, I think, and then kind of help align what's being said. I think it sounds like we've got some high level goals that we can articulate, and then we've got some other things we can look at. So from what I'm hearing you saying, we're looking to streamline the process, to remove redundancy, and to clarify roles and responsibilities effectively.
Perfect. So we created, I think it's 4 budget stages. And so, the first budget stage is budget development, alignment of operational priorities with financial requirements. And this is basically the direct definition, development of goals and objectives. We want to do this probably earlier. And this is one of the things that review the goals and objectives in the summer. So, you kind of create some ideas in the spring, and this way the goals and objectives are solidified in the fall. Plenty of time before the budget process and anticipating anything before that budget process. And then it also will allow us to reflect on what these new initiatives might be, priorities of the superintendent, priorities of the board, and then also reflect on any programs or activities or cost centers that we might want to find efficiencies or hate to use the word cuts, but because of inactivities and that sort of thing.
I think that makes sense. I think the word that sticks out to me in this memo is being proactive. And I feel like so much of what we've done over the past few years has been reactive to things that have happened. So I think if we can, be a little forward thinking and just push that process back a little bit and look to the future earlier, I think it would be helpful, because sometimes I feel like, we've all struggled with creating policy within the budget, and that we want to not do that. So.
And I want to reflect on your thoughts on this, but I realize the first year that we move everything up, it's going to be a bit of a time crunch, if you will, or a little more effort. But I feel like the return on investment of that is going to help you and your team in identifying things earlier, so we don't run into those fire drills, if you will, during the budget process and learn. And so I think it would also align us, with the community, and not align our priorities. It'd be transparent so the community can see it, and therefore we're not in these fire drills during the budget process.
Sure, this topic sounds like, whether it's these particular points, but it's a reflection on the budget, a plan, and a discussion moving forward at a more comprehensive level, right? That's what I basically see this, and engaging in that type of discussion. So the immediate secrecy of that is the timing of that. So other than that, that seems reasonable.
Okay.
Do you think there's any concern about, if we're talking about cuts of positions or whatever, if we start talking about that in the fall, how does that affect culture? And, I worry, I just don't want anybody, I don't want consternation when there doesn't necessarily need to be consternation. I just want to try to,
It depends the way you talk about that. If you talk it in global terms of efficiencies or otherwise, but if you start targeting, for the want of a better term, or speaking about specific programs, specific areas, it might be more, well, it will be problematic.
Right.
It definitely will be, because it has potential, and actually not even the potential, it will do what you just said.
Right.
So I'm just going to throw this out there, and there's no target on the back of extracurriculars, but I'm just thinking like a club and a council or a sport that doesn't have anticipated enrollment to support it going forward. You could just say globally,
Yes.
this is an area that you might see a couple $1,000s of efficiency.
Well, I'm going to be honest, it'll also help me in administration because of the areas where potentially it might bring something forward, but there are areas I would be cognizant, is this something that we really want to do in this district? Is this something moving forward? And I'd rather find that out sooner than later.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's going to have benefits just beyond the budget process too, in terms of workflow. Okay, and we've kind of touched upon this. The point B is direction to superintendents, forecasting guidance, the financial impact of any operational goals, the responsiveness, maintaining ability to respond to external circumstances. External circumstances meaning unforeseen items or.
Yes, such as, for example, mental health or school security were both escalated because of things that happened beyond the control of the Board of Education.
Okay. So I feel like we gave enough, go ahead, sorry.
I'm not going
I feel like we gave enough kind of direction in terms of next steps to you, in terms of some recommendations you might come back to us. Our fellow board members, enough detail and clarity of how we'd like to attack this process.
I think this is fine in the context of, because listen, it happens all the time, not Darien necessarily, all across Connecticut, boards of education stuff. When they work with superintendents, they do give general direction, right? There are cases where they will give, like, listen, in general, I'd like to see you between these areas. And thereafter, if I can't make that, I don't think that's in the good interest of the best interest of the district. I'll have to come and validate as to why I just couldn't make it, right? Or maybe I did make it, or maybe I came in lower than that. But the idea of giving a general direction is like, that's not far, right?
Okay.
It's how you do it, how we message it so that people don't feel as if superintendent can't bring what he needs. I will always bring what I need. But the question is it above or beyond a certain number that they have to validate that? So, I mean, that would be the.
So I want to reflect on how we implemented security, because that was a well thought out, deliberated. Again, it wasn't as transparent to the public because there were, security concerns. We had some of the meetings in executive session, but that was a well thought out, detailed process, and how you highlighted the issue to the board, maybe even over a year ago. And then over time, and as circumstances change in the external environment, you came back and said, now is the time, and we developed a plan over an extensive time period. So I think that's a great example of something we've already actually done, within the budget process. And again, we approved the financing outside of the budget process, but that was because of the externalities that, developed over time. So go ahead.
Thank you. Alan, I appreciate your comments about the generality of the numbers and the student impact being the real goal of the budget. I think it's important to always remember that is our job, right? Is to provide for students and to create a budget that does so. So I appreciate those comments. I just kind of want to echo and expand a little bit on what Sarah said as well about as we talk about making the process more efficient, I think it is good to remember that if we can have policy and program initiative and organizational structure conversations in advance, then the budget process doesn't become the only opportunity to introduce them. So I'm very supportive of I appreciate the fourth note in this too, ensuring that we have that follow-up. I think that if we can take some of the things that we learned from this past and try to work on them proactively, hopefully our next budget cycle can be more about the dollars as opposed to, the programs and the policies.
And just to build on that a little bit, I do like the fact that you've noted here, whatever word you use or don't use it, it's not a completely mutually exclusive idea that policies have to be. Sometimes there'll be situations where, yes, I would have loved to, but maybe that's just a good thing. Maybe you could say like the one-to-one. I just felt that if we didn't do it now, we were change that one-to-one policy. We weren't going to be able to do it. We're going to spend more money investing. And I recognized I should have done it like maybe 2 years ago, maybe perhaps. but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna, just because I should have done it earlier, if I feel it's an urgency, I would have to bring it to the table, you know?
Absolutely. Please, we don't want to handcuff any, of the right decisions for this process. So it's I kind of think of Romat, but you can deviate from the route where appropriate. Okay, so the board review of superintendent budget. So again, just to solidify the process, the superintendent, develops a budget, and a recommended budget is then placed in the Board of Education's hands. I think that's where the most thorough review and vetting occurs of the superintendent's recommended budget. Because again, we are the only body that has statutory authority of taking the appropriation and then allocating it by line item by line item. And so this is where the most detail is verbalized and shared with the community also through our Super Saturday and ensuing meetings. So, when the first bullet is the role of other town bodies, statutory authority. So like I've said it 3 times, we are the one that have the statutory authority. So we want to solicit feedback during this, because it's very important as we then adopt our budget, the Board of Education budget, and then hand it down to the fiscal authority, meaning the Board of Finance, that we fully vetted and created a budget that we can call our own and adopt it and have responsibility as elected officials and own it. So I think, what kind of has gotten upside down over the last few years is, and I personally commented it during the process, we started getting feedback from the other bodies before we even logged our own questions to the superintendent. And so I think this is one of the key areas that needs to change. We can reduce redundancies, but at the same time, get the same type of feedback, but then filter those questions so that we don't overwhelm the administration with over 240 questions. Never going to forget that number. Did that include our questions, by the way? Yes. Oh, okay. So, we're guilty as well, probably, of having some redundancies there. But I think one of the role of the town bodies is important. This is something we can work on with our other government officials. But, I've said what our role is. I'm not going to repeat that. But then we hand it off to the Board of Finance, its fiscal authority. And ironically, the Board of Finance has another role. And I don't think we've done this, but in the statute, it outlines that once we hand our budget to the Board of Finance, there's a 10-day window, which it shall, it's not might or could or may, it shall go and review our budget and find areas where they can find redundancies or consolidate services to find efficiencies. I'm not aware we've done that.
All services are just non-educational.
I'm sorry, non-educational services. Yeah. So thank you. That's a key point. So I'm not sure we've done that in my 4 years. No.
Not in the form in which it's discussed in the statute. I mean, let's say this, we're very informal about it.
Okay. Yeah, very informal, if you will. So I want to make sure that we ensure that this happens as part of the budget process in the future, because we have done some good work in finding efficiencies and redundancies. And the perfect example is the technology services department here in town. And so, it's, again, make it maybe more formalized so we do follow that process. And it's very clear. There's a 10-day window. They can file a report, give the reason where they may suggest finding efficiencies in some redundancies, and then we have the opportunity to clarify why we may or may not want to follow those. So I don't know if we can discuss this with town council, school council, so we can better understand what that means.
Can I just clarify what that means? Does that mean
Yeah.
redundancies with town and school or within our own budget?
So they,
Go
ahead.
as I understand it, again, I'm not a legal expert, but reading the statute, and Rich or Alan, you can opine, but it's looking at services that are in our budget that are non-educational, that they may see, hey, and again, let's go back before technology services. Hey, maybe there's an opportunity to consolidate those services. We suggest you pursue some action, but they don't have the final decision. We do. We just have to justify the
Gotcha.
decision.
Okay.
A contemporary example is the discussion around healthcare.
And, there's always a discussion of, Certainly, if you want to formalize it so that it's very visible, it's there, it's a process, you can go listen. And there's always a discussion, what's educational, what's not educational, but that's okay. But if you want to formalize the process, and it'd be helpful to you, it's not as if we haven't been getting feedback, but we've been working collaboratively with the various town bodies and getting that feedback. But if you want to see it to be very visible about it.
I'm kind of seeing a flow chart or developing a calendar for the next year's budget cycle. And I think that's an important kind of item to include there. And it can be done via letter. It doesn't have to be done via meeting. If maybe they could call their own meeting if they will, but I do think since it's been written in statute, I think it's important that we formalize that. Rich, have you had any experiences in your previous work?
Typically, it doesn't really happen. It usually happens, like if there's an opening in a certain area, like, is there an opportunity to combine? Usually there's a lot of impediments. So if it's the person in the Board of Ed taking some work on town, usually the town gets led a little bit. If it's vice versa, usually the Board of Ed gets led a little bit. Some communities have tried to like share grounds work. And
Custodial services, I've seen that.
That's not to work. Looking at things like health insurance, that tends not to work very well, because what ends up happening is if you have police officers who are typically high claimant individuals, it brings up the cost on the other side, or the other end, you have a lot of maintenance people who tend to be high claimant individuals, it breaks the town up. So usually it doesn't end up saving money, it just kind of like a push.
Retirement benefits, perhaps, though?
Well, the benefits for retirees are very different based on like the bargaining agreements.
Outside of the unions, I'm saying, maybe. I don't know. I'm just throwing out.
The other thing you just have to be conscious of from my perspective is you don't get into what Katie just said, that we now are talking about all policy issues, right? That come from another body, right? And that takes a long time to.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we got down the wormhole on this. I just wanted to create the process, the stopping point, or just to highlight that should be part of the process.
John, if I may on that, I think
Go ahead.
there's, sorry to interject. I think in my former career as RTM chair and Mr. Palin's as finance and Jack, we tried to push back and kind of cause, if that's the right word, this influx of questions earlier and try to become part of the process. Because I think there became this adversarial conflict group where it was, we don't get to opine on a budget until the budget is given to us. And by then it's too late for the RTM. So I think the pendulum, I agree with you. I think the pendulum has swung too far one way, but I think we kind of have to find a balance on where we allow questions from the other bodies to come through. And maybe we can discuss as a board, but maybe we just kind of go through the questions and check which ones we are interested in hearing answers from the administration. And then the others we push back until we deliberate amongst those bodies.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
And I'll disclose, I actually sat on F&B as well back in the day. So I totally understand the process. And again, Dennis, great point. There's no way that I want to not solicit feedback. It's just finding the right time and right structure to solicit that feedback and receive it and give the administration the questions that we feel are going to help our budget process.
I think there are times that I felt like there was, 15 members of the Board of Ed this year, where everybody's putting questions directly to the superintendent and to Duke. And we do need to call them a little bit, I think. And I think, having some sort of filter in a way is, because some of those questions were not necessarily directly budgetarily.
Exactly.
Here's the way I see it. I mean, we solicit feedback from the community all the time and they address us with emails and, a public comment. So I say we handle that the same way. It's addressed to the Board of Education. It's the Board of Education's responsibility to chase down the answers where it sees value and it'll be valuable to the budget process. So I think it's a nuance, but it's an important nuance because, frankly, I'm not allowed to just fire off an email to Rich and ask him a question.
Absolutely.
As a Board of Education member. Okay. Right. So, everything if people don't know the process gets filtered through the superintendent. So, I'd love to ask Rich a lot of questions, but anyway, all joking aside, I think that's the goal. It's not to stop the solicitation of feedback. It's finding right time and the right structure.
Right balance. Yep, agreed.
And the right balance. And it goes back to the statutory authority. Again, I mean, Board of Finance has a role here. And the way I see the Board of Finance's role is taking the Board of Education budget and reviewing it and like becoming aware, because it has to find a way to, ultimately tax and set a mill rate that ultimately gets approved by the RTM. But, and they also then receive the town budget at the same time. So they're the fiscal authority that kind of brings the two sides together. I mean, I joke, there's been references or connotations that we bought an island as a town and we made some adjustments to Board of Education budget. We had no discussion over the island, and they have no, at the Board of Selectmen level had no discussion over the Board of Education budget. So, that's why the statutory authority is so important. And then the RTM's role is ultimately to receive, as I see it, receive the Board of Finance's approved budget. And in a way, they can basically say, yes, we approve it, or no, we don't. They can't increase the budgets in their role. And I do understand, based on some conversation I saw at OPC, that they are also trying to refine, looking at the roles and responsibilities of the committees and better refine what their roles are as well. So, I'm sure we'll see some feedback from there. Maybe they're going to adjust certain things, but, again, I want to give RTM members the opportunity to solicit questions or submit questions. Same thing with the Board of Finance. It's just finding the right time and the right structure. And I think we can do that.
No, John,
I
I
guess
think your point is solid, and I think we can point to the fact that, when the Board of Education presented the budget to the Board of Finance, there were 0 questions from the Board of Finance members. So maybe we've gone too transparent with our work, and they're asking all the questions in our process and not their process.
Well, just a little pushback there, Dennis. I think that meeting is an official one just to receive the budget. Right. So, I think by the kind of letter of the statute, they're just receiving the budget that evening. And, I'm sure we're going to see some questions, but, I think the chairman's already been, the Board of Finance has already been out complimenting the process and the transparency. But again, finding the right timing of the transparency.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah. Any other comments along these lines?
Just the B2 with, reviewing the organization of the materials. I think, going forward, it might be helpful just to have one working Google Doc or something with everything in there. I think sometimes it's frustrating for me to have, you have the questions from this week, the questions from next week, the questions, like where is the particular question? Can we consolidate it into one document organized by RC so that it's in one place?
Yeah, and that's a great suggestion, 100%. And I think as we refine the process, it's going to be easier for, it's not going to be questions kind of coming in as a salvo, if you will.
Right.
It will be better organized in terms of when the questions come. And so I guess what I'm envisioning is creating taking the calendar that we use and refining the calendar process. And I'm not sure if you want to work on your end on a suggested calendar in terms of, basically the feedback you just heard, and creating, okay, this is the date I come with the my budget recommendations, Super Saturday, a couple follow-ups, and then this is the opportunity. Questions can be lobbed in via the Board of Education throughout this process, but then at the end, you give the opportunity to solidify any last feedback from the two other elected bodies that part of the process. Does that make sense, or was I clear there? Or I'm just trying to create a
Define next
roadmap.
steps. Yeah.
If the board so wishes, Rich and I can look at that calendar. May have to liaison with other bodies just to, but that dictates everything from the tour of the schools to publication of books to everything you've talked about today. So that would be the first thing we would need to look at, because that's where it all begins.
Perfect.
Going to that tour of the schools, I do think it makes sense to have the tour of the schools before we approve a budget. So we can see those capital things. My concern with that is we have Super Saturday in January. We also do a tour of schools on a Saturday. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't know that I want to take 2 of my Saturdays in January to do the tour of the schools, but I don't know what the best time to do that.
We can look at other times,
I mean, is it,
potentially.
do you know the capital projects soon enough to do it in December? I don't know.
So the initial capital budget goes to the board, that meeting right before Thanksgiving.
Right. Oh, that's
Oh.
true. That's right. Yeah.
So maybe-
Tweaked a little bit,
Yeah.
But for the most part, you will see it.
Maybe we do the tour in the fall then.
And for,
Late fall.
and for the most part, the board takes a sort of cursory look at it at that meeting.
Right.
But I mean,
Yeah.
you can highlight, we can
Yeah.
highlight some of the big items and maybe, again, refine that tour to shorten the length of it as well. So, but I fully agree.
Yeah.
It needs we should look for ways to push it ahead of
Yeah.
the
And I'm just
votes.
thinking that auditorium conversation would have been, I think, a little bit
Absolutely,
smoother if
yeah.
we had all been in that building prior. So.
And, okay, and then based on that calendar, clarify when other town bodies will receive budget books. I mean, in the paper-based, I think the Board of Education receiving a paper-based book is appropriate of the superintendent's budget. I think then and having extras available for loan, and it's all on the web as well. But to create a full-blown budget book for every elected official of the superintendent's budget, and then the Board of Education budget, if I'm not mistaken, then gets printed and distributed. And then does the Board of Finance budget? No. Okay. Once it's approved by the Board of Finance. So I think we can save a lot of trees and have the budget books available and maintain the transparency of our budget. By maybe finding efficiencies on the number of books that are printed, at least in the superintendent's budget. And then hand the hard copies to the Board of Finance after the Board of Education budget is approved.
Agreed.
I don't know if people have thoughts, and I can solicit feedback from other.
Yeah,
town
I mean,
bodies,
I agree. Like, we don't need to be printing these giant multi-hundred page things for people that don't really use them. I think if it were me, I would survey the Board of Finance, the RTM F&B, RTM Education, and say, how many of you want a hard copy? And ask them in November, December, or do we just give one to the chair of each committee? I don't know, but I don't think we need to give one for everybody.
Agreed, Sarah. I think we at one point, John, we used to do opt-in
Yeah.
for the RTM, and I would go back to that policy. Because I always remember,
Okay.
I always had it on my
If-
iPad.
If that doesn't become unwieldy, maybe there's a process that we can opt in. Does that kind of make sense?
Does it create-
Kind of. Just the opt-in part becomes, eventually so many people getting feedback from people who want it, who doesn't want it. So we'll look at it.
I think it would almost like calendar invite and like.
Yeah, we just have a deadline, and if you don't respond, you don't get a book.
Well, perhaps we
Simple.
don't manage it. Perhaps we have the committees and
Yeah.
boards manage it.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
And request a certain number of books from us by a deadline. I
Yep.
think the B part of that question is when the books are distributed, because it's a discussion for the past couple of years. The board now gets the books right before Christmas. But of course, that's several weeks before Super Saturday, and we've had requests from other town bodies for them to receive the books at the same time as the board.
No.
And so it'd be nice to have a recommendation from your committee about when you think fellow town bodies should receive the books.
Dennis is vehemently shaking his head up there.
They don't, they're not the Board of this goes back to this part where, we're soliciting questions. I don't think they're the Board of Education. They get the book when they get the book. It's a courtesy for me. So, and that's even wearing the former RTM hat. I think it's a courtesy to get the book. So for me, I think it's going to cause more problems than to help.
Typically, not exclusively, but very typically, the board would get, actually, in many ways, typically what it is, typically the board would get the book when the superintendent presents his budget on that particular night, but nobody else gets it, right? Our board traditionally has got it in advance, which is fine, but if you start giving it to everybody in advance before even we've had an opportunity to share what it is, it just becomes, it becomes a wee bit of the Wild West, a wee bit, it's hard to manage.
I mean, I don't know if there's a right date here, but I certainly think we should have the opportunity to review it and post Super Saturday, or, it's because if we're soliciting questions later at this point, I think Super Saturday would be the culmination of the question period. And therefore, that might be the catalyst to distribute the book for those who want it. Does that make sense?
Well, today they're just, at this time, they're distributed to other committees on the Thursday, which is the day of the budget opening.
Mhm.
And then
Oh.
they have them 48 hours, not quite,
Oh,
before
okay.
Super Saturday.
Oh, then
Which
that's
that
fine.
makes sense to me, but I don't think, I mean, I like the fact that we have it and only we have it from December
If-
21st through that Thursday, because it is our job to do these line items, right? So we need time to formulate our questions.
Okay, so I'm okay with that Thursday for the publish, let's just say the publishing, the publication to the community of the superintendent's proposed budget. And that's when it goes online. And that's, we get the courtesy just because we are the elected officials responsible and gives us time to prepare over the winter break, holiday break. So,
If you prepare, like after the administrative budget is presented, an opportunity for the public to just to build into that process, ample opportunity. Oh, that's the first time I heard what the superintendent said or whatever, or what the budget's received. Okay, that's the way the process works. And then you build in process into the calendar that they feel as if, well, now I can go back and ask questions and have opportunities to. We also have to sort of talk about just in general, like we also share that with PTOs, get the book, CPAC get the book. So those will be discussions too within the whole calendar thing. So.
okay, I mean, there's this physical nature of handing out the book, there's the costs associated with that. So, and then the timing, I think the timing, we're in agreement that Thursday makes sense of publishing the superintendent's proposed budget.
Yeah, honestly, John, if we do 1 and 2 properly and have the discussions earlier in the year, the budget book is really just the quantification of said policies and discussions, right? So then the budget should be then much easier to digest in 48 hours for the general public.
I guess the suggestion I would make, just hearing what the board's saying here this morning, Rich, and I'll just work up a schedule, draft it, bring it back, and we're sort of trying to incorporate some of these thoughts.
Absolutely, yeah. That's
I mean, the
it.
goal is to make, but honestly, the two of your lives much easier, right? I mean, there's so many last minute turnaround things that you guys needed to do this year that if we can streamline that, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, we've hit A, B, and C there on number 2, and the handoff to the Board of Finance and RTM. So actually, let me just back up. So it's as part of that developed schedule, we do want the opportunity that the RTM committees and the Board of Finance can come forth, they can be present at every meeting, but there's got to be one meeting that they can come forth in a formal manner and address us before we get to ad cut night, is the day, whatever, ad cut meeting, which I hate that nomenclature, but we'll figure out a different name at some point. So I think, as you guys develop that schedule, make sure that there's a meeting that all 3 of those bodies can come in, and we will be receiving their questions throughout. We will be asking them, and that will give them the opportunity before we adopt our budget to highlight anything that we missed or really put an asterisk or on what the points they'd like to make. And that's their opportunity to provide the feedback. Okay. So does that make sense to everybody? They can ask questions at any public comment and/or any email along the way. We will filter them. We will ensure that we ask questions throughout the process. If we miss anything, that's their opportunity in one meeting. Superintendent's in place, staff's here, administrative staff is here, and therefore, and the Board of Education members will be here, and we'll be all in agreement that we've dotted every I and crossed every T before we get to ad cut night and our final adoption. The question is, where do we put the public hearing?
Isn't that in the town charter for us or just the Board of
No,
Finance?
it's just Board of Finance. So we do have to have a public hearing. So I like the idea of the public hearing becoming before ad cut night, but at the same time, it feels sometimes a little late because then it's just focused on ad cut and we miss some of the larger input that we'd like to hear from the community, what their goals and objectives might be and their priorities. But for now, let's just keep that date where it typically is, and then we can, in the new schedule that you're creating, maybe make some adjustments, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm seeing all nods, so we'll just the handoff to the Board of Finance and RTM. So the level of board administration support in person or otherwise. So this last Board of Finance meeting, it was a very formal, just handoff meeting. I think you attended and Duke attended, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. the
Everybody
cabinet
was there. Mhm.
Okay, so maybe there's a review there that the whole cabinet doesn't have to be there. I think it's important that you as chief executive officer of the schools have to be there, but your cabinet, since it's not a feedback meeting, maybe we can strike them from that meeting. And then the handoff the RTM, it's basically the Board of Finance's budget at that point. So I'm not sure, I'll solicit some feedback from the committees, but I'm not sure we should even be part of that because our role is done at that point.
Mhm.
We can be present, but I just, it's the RTM's responding to the Board of Finance's budget at that point, not our budget.
I think it's the same with the Board of Finance public hearing, like everybody was there for that 2-minute and 33-second meeting. And again, does everybody need to be there? No. So in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if you, have to bring your cabinet to that. Again, we'll solicit feedback from Board of Finance, but I think those are ways to find great hours of efficiencies from especially your cabinet members that live, outside of town. Especially if there's no give and take. Again, once we finish our budget, I think a lot of your work is done. And if there needs to be clarification, you're well equipped and, our chair is well equipped to answer those questions at that point. So unless it's something really esoteric that, Rich needs to explain, but okay. And then number 4, ensuring that there are spring, summer follow-up. I think, we just have to remember to do that. We have instituted a process, at least over the 3 or 4 years, we've been doing more of that. But I think the opportunity of that is we flag items. And so we're well prepared for our retreat to address some of those items, or they might be more imperative that we do it prior to that. But you have a comment?
I just would suggest pairing the master agenda with probably creating a list of items that we're tabling, and then somewhere near the end of the budget season, having a master agenda discussion, which I think works naturally anyway,
Yep.
in which we get those items onto the agenda so that they have a home. I think one of the things that happens is nobody's really tracking the items that have been tabled, and then they don't.
Right.
So if it's a hot topic.
Yeah, I'm thinking, should we come up with
Mhm.
those items that we said we would table and look
Mhm.
them? I don't know that we have that list.
I have a list on the back of a piece of paper in
Yeah.
one of my
But
binders,
if we
but
could formalize some of that.
we need to formalize it.
Yeah, but that would be at the board level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe
so
that's-
definitely, full agreement there. And I feel like we've been getting better at it as a board over the years.
Yep.
But not perfect. Go ahead, Dennis.
Sorry, John, if I may go back to a previous point of, I think and I'm going to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we've done a much better job of working with the RTM committees over the past few years. And I think technology has also helped that, if for people who can't attend can at least watch or watch a video of a movie. So, but I also think we've had fairly easy budget, or fairly non-contentious budgets, we'll say. So I think we haven't had the need to go and present in front of the RTM subcommittees. But I think we have to be careful that we do have a plan or the ability to do so when things may not work as smoothly as they have in a past number of years. So just to highlight that.
Yeah, I see. Yes. If there's a need to advocate for the Board of Education's adopted budget, absolutely, you're going to be at those meetings advocating for our budget.
Yep, that's all.
Yeah, most certainly. I appreciate that. And, that's why it's important that Duke is there and the superintendent is there, and as they are in every year. I just don't know if the entire cabinet needs to be there. And as Board of Education members, I know we pick and choose which meetings that we think it's important to have our presence as well. So, but again, I keep going back to, our work is essentially done other than advocating.
Agreed.
Once we adopt that budget. And again, just go quickly back to the budget books. I don't know if I need a final copy of a printed copy of our adopted budget if it's online.
I
So
agree.
that's.
I would
that's an
opt out of
efficiency
Yeah, I would opt out of that
Yeah.
too. It goes just on my
Yeah.
bookshelf.
Yeah. It's great to reflect on the great work that we've done, but we can do that online. Did any other items around this subject that we should discuss or?
You have a few items in there, like forecasting and guidance where I think board members might have, and administrative staff might have different points of view, but I would suggest maybe a next step is to actually look at a calendar from administration. And then once you have a calendar in front of you, start to kick some of those items around in more detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an example of that might be, we'll delineate on the, potentially on a calendar, that that's a public discussion of the guidance, right?
Mhm.
So there's no miscommunication about stuff. But we'll get, for the next meeting, may I suggest that we bring a draft back and
Yes.
try
Yeah,
and
I think that's great.
just,
Yeah.
at least from what works from our perspective with what has to work with dates and different things, we'll go from there.
And should we add an agenda item for Tuesday night to formalize that, what we, just a poll of what we said we would all table and what we should bring back? Or is that not something we need to talk about, the 9 of us?
That's a good idea.
Just quickly?
Yeah, just
I personally am not ready for naming stuff unless the board is, in terms.
just items,
Just that we thought, like athletics, we need to talk about more.
Oh,
in
you
depth,
want
like
to
what-
brainstorm stuff?
Yeah.
items that were identified during the budget process that need to go to the master agenda in some form. We may or may not be able to define exactly what it looks like, but at least so
Or-
that those items are
High level.
named.
When is our next master agenda conversation? Do we know? I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know off the top of my head either. It's just not on the agenda at the moment.
No, it's
Actually, I
not,
might-
it's not on next week's.
actually, I might have a copy of it.
Let's see.
I don't see it quickly here on the next couple of meetings. I don't see it particularly coming up. Nope, it's not in the near future.
Does it allow for some time at the next agenda meeting?
No, the first one that I'm looking at here is June that we've done everything else, so that's that way, I think.
It's a light meeting.
Yeah, it's a light meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, so I think
so
we
we'll
could
just-
potentially add.
Yeah, motion to amend the agenda. And again, it's just a
We
bullet.
we don't
point.
No, you
even,
don't
we
need to.
haven't
We can-
published it
we can
yet, so we
do
could.
it.
we
Oh, you
don't
didn't
know-
publish it yet?
No.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, and again, just bullet points. We're not going to go into the discussion of that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think that's it. Do we have any other comments? Public comment?
Anyone in person? There are no raised hands online.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor, unanimous. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
you.
Bye-bye.